This is the image they tried to bury. A grainy infrared still, captured from a classified sensor feed and leaked to a defense intelligence outlet less than 6 weeks ago. It shows a shape, not a plane, not exactly. A shadow against the darkness of the Iranian plateau, a boomerang silhouette cruising at 50,000 feet with no transponder, no contrail, no radio emission. Nothing. As of 1:15 a.m. local time, Friday, February 28, 2026, two B-2 Spirit stealth bombers departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and entered Iranian airspace. For the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic, a $2 billion aircraft designed to end civilizations slipped past one of the most densely layered air defense networks on the planet, and Iran did not know it was there until the ground beneath its mountain bases began to shake. The world did not go loud that night. It went quiet. And that silence is the most terrifying part of this entire story. Welcome to World Brief Daily. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the moment. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened on February 28th is not a military footnote. It is the opening chapter of the largest American air campaign since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, a campaign that has now raged for 47 days and counting. Operation Epic Fury. Remember that name. We are talking about over 13,000 targets struck in 38 days of major combat operations. We are talking about 155 Iranian naval vessels damaged or destroyed. We are talking about 85% of Iran's entire defense industrial base rendered inoperable. We are talking about oil surging to $119 a barrel, American gasoline climbing to $4.12 a gallon, the Strait of Hormuz mined and blockaded, ceasefire talks in Islamabad collapsing 3 days ago, and a naval blockade imposed on Iranian ports as of Monday morning. In this report, we are going to break down exactly what the B-2 did, why Iran's underground doctrine has been shattered, how the Strait became the most dangerous waterway on Earth, and why the Islamabad negotiations fell apart with the clock running out. Buckle up. History is being written in real time, and the ink is still wet. To understand why the B-2 was the weapon that changed everything, you have to understand what it was sent to destroy. For over 2 decades, Iran built its entire military strategy around a single powerful premise. You cannot win a conventional air war against a technologically superior adversary. But go deep enough underground, reinforce with enough concrete and steel, and you become untouchable. Iran called this its Underground Doctrine. State television broadcast footage of missiles rolling along automated rails inside mountain tunnels. Rows of drones in fluorescent lit corridors carved from solid rock. The message to the world was simple. Come and find us. We will survive down here. Beneath the Alborz Mountains surrounding Tehran, Iran constructed what military analysts call missile cities, vast underground complexes housing ballistic missile launchers, drone assembly lines, ammunition depots, and command nodes. According to CENTCOM assessments, some of these facilities could launch ballistic missiles directly through fissures in their ceilings without ever exposing a launcher to open air. Fordow, Natanz, Parchin, the tunnel networks beneath Bushehr Naval Base. These were the crown jewels of Iran's strategic defense architecture, constructed over 20 years at a cost estimated in the tens of billions of dollars. This was Iran's shield. And on February 28th, that shield cracked. Here's what you need to understand about the B-2 Spirit. It is not a bomber in the way most people imagine bombers. It is a flying wing, 172 feet across, with no vertical tail, no traditional fuselage, coated in layers of radar-absorbent material that collapse its radar cross-section to approximately that of a large bird. It carries 40,000 pounds of ordnance internally. Its signature weapon is the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker buster specifically designed to punch through tens of meters of reinforced concrete and solid rock before detonation. Only 21 B-2s were ever built. Each one cost $2.13 billion when factoring in development and production. The total program cost exceeded $44 billion for just those 21 aircraft. There is no other platform on Earth that can deliver a weapon of this size, at this range, with this degree of stealth penetration. According to defense analysts, Iran's S-300 PMU-2 and Bavar 373 air defense systems, which detect conventional aircraft beyond 100 kilometers saw their effective engagement range collapse to a fraction of that distance against the B-2. Sources at CENTCOM confirmed that the B-2 strikes on the opening night were, and this is their terminology, uncontested surgical strikes against missile facilities deep inside Iran. Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander, stated that B-2 and B-1 bombers carried out strikes that were completely unimpeded by Iranian air defenses. The most expensive combat aircraft in history flew over one of the most defended airspaces on the planet and met no resistance. Let that register. But here is the catch. The B-2 did not arrive once and leave. According to CENTCOM's operational data, B-2 Spirits have been flying repeated global air power missions throughout Operation Epic Fury. On March 1st, they struck hardened ballistic missile sites with 2,000-pound munitions. By March 6th, CENTCOM confirmed B-2s had hit approximately 200 targets deep inside Iran over a 72-hour period, with areas surrounding Tehran as the primary focus. On March 17th, images released by CENTCOM showed B-2s departing White Man with puzzling white rectangular patches sealed along their wing leading edges, features that defense analysts could not identify, possibly new radar-absorbent coatings or classified sensor modifications drawn from B-21 radar technology. Nobody outside a classified briefing room knows what those patches are. On April 5th, B-2s flew a 36-hour non-stop mission to drop bunker buster bombs on an underground compound where senior IRGC commanders had gathered after intelligence indicated a nexus of senior Revolutionary Guard leadership at the location. Admiral Cooper personally authorized the strike, 36 hours in the air, 7,000 miles from Missouri to the Iranian plateau and back. A single B-2 carrying enough ordnance to destroy an entire airfield in one pass, up to 80 500-pound JDAMs per aircraft. This is not a scalpel. This is a scalpel the size of a continent, and it has been cutting for 6 straight weeks. Now let us talk about what happened on the ground, because the damage assessments emerging from Iran tell a story that Tehran desperately does not want told. According to the White House operational summary released after 38 days, U.S. forces struck more than 13,000 targets, over 2,000 command and control centers, more than 1,450 defense industrial base targets, over 1,500 air defense systems, more than 450 ballistic missile facilities, approximately 800 attack drone targets, over 600 naval targets, more than 700 mine warfare systems destroyed. The White House stated that 85% of Iran's defense industrial base has been destroyed. Iran's daily military flight activity has been reduced to zero. 150 vessels across multiple classes were sunk, and submarine capabilities were eliminated entirely. Sources at the Pentagon say the operational tempo was unlike anything since the opening phase of shock and awe in 2003. 13 American service members have been killed. Israel has reported 24 dead. Al Jazeera estimated 1,937 Iranian fatalities, though the number has not been independently verified. The U.S. military deployed 26 different aircraft types, 4 land-based missile systems, 6 sea-based weapons platforms, and for the first time in combat, introduced the reverse-engineered Iranian Shahed drone, rebuilt in America, improved, and fired right back at Iran. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth told reporters at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa that munitions stockpiles remain full and that the American will to continue is, in his words, ironclad. And make no mistake about what the naval campaign alone has accomplished. The IRGC Navy, the force that was supposed to swarm the Strait of Hormuz with fast attack boats and coastal missiles, has been eviscerated. Over 155 vessels across multiple classes damaged or destroyed. CENTCOM confirmed that all 4 ships of the Shahid Soleimani-class corvette catamaran, Iran's most advanced surface combatants commissioned just 2 years earlier, were taken out of the fight by March 11th. The Shahid Bagheri, an Iranian drone carrier with a 180-meter flight deck and ski jump ramp, was struck multiple times and left burning. A U.S. nuclear submarine even torpedoed an Iranian frigate in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka. The Shahed Mahalati Naval Boatyard in Bushehr, responsible for manufacturing and repairing Iran's fast attack craft, was severely damaged. CENTCOM stated that this facility represented a significant portion of Iran's small boat production and maintenance capacity. Not a dent, a foundational loss. It gets worse. Here is what nobody is connecting. The Underground Doctrine did not just crack at Bushehr, it cracked everywhere. Satellite imagery analyzed by open source intelligence researchers shows massive impact craters at the Parchin military complex. 3 precision strikes in a neat row directly on top of a hardened facility. At Fordow, the enrichment center buried deep inside a mountain near Qom. The IAEA confirms the facility has sustained damage and is under monitoring. At Isfahan, the uranium conversion facility has been struck. Iran's heavy water production plant at Arak was hit in late March, and according to the IAEA, is no longer operational. The entire constellation of Iran's declared nuclear infrastructure is operating under the shadow of an active war. The secondary explosions that echoed through those mountain tunnels for hours were not ammunition cooking off. They were the sound of a strategic doctrine dying. And this brings us to the variable that governs everything. The Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the world's oil trade, 20% of global liquefied natural gas. Every tanker, every LNG carrier from the Gulf squeezed through a choke point barely 21 miles wide. Before February 28th, over 130 vessels transited daily. Within days of the opening strikes, the IRGC forbade passage, launched 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships, and laid sea mines across the shipping lanes. Traffic dropped by 70% and then effectively to zero. Insurance premiums surged to 10 times pre-war levels. Oil that had been at $69 a barrel hit $119 in March. Dubai crude reached $166 on March 19th, its highest price on record. Gas prices in the United States climbed from $2.92 to $4.12 a gallon in 5 weeks. In California, they exceeded $5. The IEA released 400 million barrels of emergency reserves across 32 nations. According to ANZ, the war has removed roughly 10 million barrels per day from global supply. Goldman Sachs warned Brent will average above $100 for the year if the strait stays closed another month. Here is where the situation cascades into crisis. On April 8th, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire mediated by Pakistan. Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The world exhaled. Oil pulled back. But by April 9th, there was no sign the strait was being reopened. Ships were still being prevented from moving through. Iran accused Israel and the United States of violating the ceasefire in Lebanon. And then came a revelation that should alarm every observer. According to reports, Iran lost track of the sea mines it had planted in the strait. It could not fully reopen the waterway, even if it wanted to. The nation that weaponized the most critical shipping lane on Earth lost the ability to de-weaponize it. On April 11th, Vice President Vance arrived in Islamabad alongside Special Envoys Witkoff and Kushner. The Iranian delegation, led by Parliamentary Speaker Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Araghchi, arrived separately, escorted by Pakistani Air Force JF-17s, F-16s, and J-10C fighters flying with transponders off. The talks lasted 21 hours, the highest level direct engagement between Washington and Tehran since the 1979 revolution, and they failed. Vance announced Iran refused to provide what he called a fundamental commitment not to develop nuclear weapons. Araghchi said they were inches away from a deal when the American side shifted the goalposts. The sticking points were nuclear enrichment, the Strait, and Lebanon, where Israeli operations have killed more than 2,000 people since March 2nd. Within hours, Trump imposed a full naval blockade of Iranian ports. CENTCOM announced it would begin Monday, April 13th at 10 a.m. Eastern. All maritime traffic entering or leaving Iranian ports interdicted. Trump posted on Truth Social that any Iranian military vessel approaching the blockade would be destroyed, and that the Navy should seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. Oil surged past $103 a barrel. Ghalibaf responded that the blockade would make Americans nostalgic for $4 to $5 gas. Capital Economics warned it risks creating flashpoints that could expand the conflict dramatically. Would the Navy seize Allied ships, target Chinese vessels? Either scenario is an escalation of historic proportions, but here is what the mainstream coverage fails to connect. The economic hemorrhage is not theoretical. It is already here, and it is accelerating. Gas has risen 1.20 per gallon since the war began. Maritime insurance is at 10 times pre-war premiums. Over 34,000 ships diverted in the past month. This is the fastest oil price surge of any conflict in modern history. The IEA's emergency reserves are approaching exhaustion. The strategic release offsetting 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day of lost supply is running down, and the gap could widen to 10 to 11 million barrels per day within weeks. That is not a supply disruption. That is a supply catastrophe. Your 401k feels it. Your gas bill feels it. Every item on every grocery shelf transported by diesel feels it. And here is what nobody in the cable news cycle is willing to say plainly. The proxy network that Iran spent decades building is under simultaneous stress. Weapon supply chains to the Houthis in Yemen, to Hezbollah in Lebanon, to militias in Iraq, components of those chains pass through underground storage facilities like those beneath Bushehr. The destruction of those stockpiles has degraded Iran's ability to arm and resupply its regional proxies at previous rates. Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at U.S. bases and Gulf states in the first 2 weeks alone. Damage to American regional installations reached an estimated $800 million in that period. But Iran's retaliatory capacity since the Bushehr strike on April 4th has been notably more limited. The degradation is real. The question is how long until the proxies feel it. And then there is the nuclear dimension that should keep every person on this planet awake at night. The Bushehr nuclear power plant, Iran's only operational commercial reactor, has been struck 4 times since the war began. Iran's foreign minister confirmed this publicly. The IAEA reported that on April 4th, a projectile struck within 75 meters of the reactor. 75 meters. The width of a competitive swimming pool is 50. You are talking about a distance shorter than a soccer field between a military strike and an operational reactor containing thousands of kilograms of nuclear material. Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear corporation that cooperates the facility, evacuated 198 personnel in a single wave. IAEA Director General Grossi expressed deep concern and warned that auxiliary buildings may house vital safety equipment. No radiation leak detected for now. But Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE all lie within the potential fallout zone. Iran's atomic energy chief wrote to the IAEA that these strikes constitute a clear violation of international law and an instance of a war crime. Foreign Minister Araghchi pointed to the international outrage over Russian activity near Zaporizhzhia and asked a devastating question. Why is that outrage absent here? The European Union, vocal about Zaporizhzhia, has been largely silent on Bushehr. That asymmetry is being noticed and is fueling a legitimate debate about whether nuclear safety standards apply equally to all nations. The nuclear card has changed shape. It is no longer about enrichment or breakout capacity. The existential risk created by the intersection of active combat and a live nuclear reactor is now a central variable in every diplomatic conversation about ending this war. History teaches us that when a nation's deterrence collapses this rapidly, one of 2 paths emerges. The first is escalation. Riskier, more unpredictable moves to compensate for lost capability. Iran has already demonstrated this impulse. It launched ballistic missiles at Turkey, a NATO member state, intercepted by alliance systems. It struck a Kuwaiti oil tanker with a sea drone 800 kilometers from the strait. It has attacked targets across 12 countries. The second path is the negotiating table, accepting military realities while some leverage remains. Iran's willingness to sit in Islamabad suggested this path was being explored. But the failure of those talks, the blockade, and continued Israeli operations in Lebanon have poisoned the well. Iran's ambassador in Islamabad described the negotiations as not an event, but a process. Behind that diplomatic language, the messaging has hardened considerably. Think about the constitutional architecture for a moment. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 requires congressional authorization for sustained military operations. Operation Epic Fury is in its 7th week. Over 13,000 targets struck, 13 Americans killed. The president threatened on Truth Social to eradicate an entire civilization, writing that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Congress has not voted on a single authorization. This is not a policy disagreement. This is a stress test of the American Republic. Can a president wage full-scale air war, impose a naval blockade, threaten civilizational destruction, and commit forces to a conflict with no declared exit strategy, all without a formal declaration? We are in uncharted waters. The precedents do not exist. What is certain is this: the doctrine of underground invincibility, the centerpiece of Iranian strategic planning for decades, has been fundamentally shattered. The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran counted on as its ultimate deterrent, has become a trap ensnaring its own economy as much as the world's. The ceasefire is hanging by a thread that could snap in 6 days. The nuclear safety question has been elevated from regional concern to global emergency. Iran possesses the ability to frame continued escalation as a threat not just to itself, but to the entire Gulf, to global energy markets, and to the international non-proliferation order. How Tehran navigates the gap between its remaining leverage and its diminished capability will determine whether the next chapter is de-escalation or a more dangerous phase of confrontation. And there is one more dimension that deserves attention: time. Before this war, Iran could reasonably believe it had the capacity to rebuild. Sanctions slow things down, but time and engineering can overcome a great deal. That luxury has been removed. The underground tunnel complexes would take years to reconstruct under optimal conditions. Under current sanction levels, without access to specialized mountain engineering equipment, the timeline extends further. The window for Iran to restore its pre-war military posture, if it ever reopens, is measured in years, not months. The regional balance has shifted not just militarily, but economically, diplomatically, and in terms of nuclear safety. The Bushehr strike alone opened questions that will not close quickly, regardless of what happens in Islamabad. Watch what happens next. Watch the Islamabad process. Reports as of yesterday indicate both delegations may return for a second round before the ceasefire expires on April 21st. Trump told the New York Post talks could happen over the next 2 days. Watch the oil markets. Brent is trading around $95, down from its highs, on tentative optimism. If the ceasefire collapses, analysts project $120 or higher. Watch the Strait. Only 17 vessels crossed on Saturday, down from 130 a day before the war. Watch Iran's proxy network. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in the Red Sea, Iraqi militias launching drones at American bases. Watch the nuclear clock. The IAEA is monitoring Fordow, Isfahan, and Bushehr in real time. Every day the war continues is a day the probability of a radiological incident ticks upward. It will not end with a press conference. It will end with either a deal nobody fully trusts or a resumption of hostilities nobody can fully control. For the decision makers in Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem, the psychological pressure is immense. Cornered leaders make dangerous decisions. Leaders who believe their civilization is at stake do not negotiate like rational actors in a game theory textbook. They negotiate like survivors. And survivors are unpredictable. The question is not whether Iran will accept a deal. The question is whether the deal that America is offering leaves Tehran any option other than total humiliation or total escalation. Here is the image that opened this report: a shadow at 50,000 feet, invisible to radar, carrying a weapon designed to crack open mountains. On February 28, 2026, that shadow entered Iranian airspace and the world went quiet. 6 weeks later, 13,000 targets are in ruins. Iran's navy sits at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. The strait is mined and blockaded. Oil is approaching $100 a barrel. A ceasefire is expiring. And the most significant direct negotiations between Washington and Tehran since 1979 have collapsed. The silence of the B-2 was not peace. It was the sound of the old order breaking apart, and the new one has not yet arrived. Subscribe to World Brief Daily. Turn on notifications. The ceasefire expires in 6 days, and when it does, you will want to be here. The next chapter of this story is already being written.